is quite unique. She manages the UN Women Office for India, Bhutan, Maldives, Sri Lanka. And what she says about herself, I'd like to read it. As a futurist and feminist, she is a loud advocate of the urgency to mainstream women across the marketplace, workplace, and community. So over to you,
Ranaji, thank you. It's a very overwhelming introduction, and like a famous Brazilian ambassador said, only my mother would believe half of that to be true. So I don't particularly recommend anybody to believe all of that, but I'm really glad to be here. And like our colleague Caren said, it's really in very troubled times that we are speaking. Even personally, I mean, really over the last 3 weeks, all that I have heard is of sorrowful news from families, from friends, from colleagues and their families. Work on our ground, really women trying to come back to work, not trying with still some form of the lockdown still existing, though I think India has opened up, but we are still witnessing a surge in cases. So it is in all ways a very unprecedented crisis, at least in my times, and also for any of the stakeholders I think that we are speaking to have not particularly seen something like this in their lives. And therefore, I think what we see today is, a crisis, a pandemic that started out as a public health crisis, which is now a fully fledged economic, social crisis, the effects of which I think will stay for years to come. It's also been a very sobering time at UN Women, particularly for everybody really who works closely with women, because what has come to fore, which was of course very obvious to those who worked with women, but one had to build a case for to even convince people, is the vulnerability and the disadvantage that women face in all aspects of their life, particularly in labor markets. We've seen layoffs, we've seen the loss of livelihoods. In fact, UN Women did a rather interesting study from the Ebola crisis of how quarantines can affect women's livelihoods, and the learning from that study was really that women took almost twice as time, and 50% of women did not come back to where they were before the pandemic. So what we know for sure is that the impact of a situation like this on women's economic security lasts much, much longer. In India, what we already know is that women had a far more poorer starting point in terms of their participation in the workforce, which is only 20% as compared to 76%. A lower income earned by women being a part of women being invisible really on the range of jobs that exist, and of course women being pushed into high risk trades. We also know that women are overrepresented in the sectors that remain hardest hit by COVID, including service, retail, entertainment, export and labor intensive manufacturing. Almost 40% of all employed women globally work in these sectors. Just to give you a quick example of the invisibility of women, we surveyed the world really as 193 countries and came to the figure that almost 70% of all global healthcare workers were women, but not a single manufacturer of the PPE kit has till today started manufacturing a PPE kit that is customized to the average size of the woman. It's still made, the PPE glasses, the PPE kits, the PPE gloves are all tailor-made to the typical average man. And that shows that it doesn't matter what the statistics say, women remain invisible. And particularly in India, in fact, worldwide, we've also seen that there has been a 35% surge in the rates of domestic violence. India has in fact registered a 60% increase in the cases of domestic violence or cases filed under the right to live with dignity as compared to March last year. And I'm giving you the data from the first 2 weeks of the lockdown. Of course, this is very, very, very sobering data and very, very disturbing data. And what we know for sure that the sector that has taken the most hit, which also accounts for almost 12% of small and medium enterprises, are enterprises that are women owned and women managed. Um, we've been fortunate really to have an ally at the Ministry of Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises, and who really encouraged UN Women to conduct a study, the findings of which are stark, again sobering, but definitely something that I'd like to run across. And it really assesses the impact of COVID-19. I know it's too soon to even assess the impact of COVID-19, but we already have drastic impact on women's lives. And we surveyed 28 sectors covering really regions across India, all four regions of India. And 69% of women, micro and small medium enterprises reported that their business remains impacted, and they're either working at lower productivity, or really what they chose in the survey is that they're managing to just about stay afloat. 11%, which is a very big number, 11% of our respondents indicated that they were near shutting down business over the next 6 months. And another 12% respondents said that they were at a point where they either had to pivot by choice or by chance. And another very, very sobering data point is that 21% of respondents, particularly from women-owned, women-managed enterprises, reported that they were to shut down or scale down their businesses due to increase in care and household work. And 71% of respondents reported to have not obtained any formal loan before the COVID pandemic, which is consistent from what we know about women's lack of access to financial services. And 68% were now expecting to take a loan from a formal institution. Now, of course, that presents to us the situation, I think, as we guessed it to be, which essentially is lack of working capital, lack of access in voice, choice, and agency, almost a 3-time surge in household work, an increase in domestic violence, and of course, trouble in coming back to where we started. We also know that there is an information gap between what women know about accessing benefits and applying for it, despite the fact that the government may have introduced an economic stimulus package. We know that many of this has not been particularly reaching women. Even direct cash benefit transfers, in the way that it happens, is not accessible to women purely because of ineligibility. The average distance between a woman and a bank is about 3 kilometers, and in a time where there was no public transport, women have not had the accessibility to go to a bank and actually withdraw that cash that may have been sitting in their accounts. What we also know is that finally, I think the models that SEWA has been setting up so wonderfully is the model to work from home, is for women to choose work and how they work and where they work from, has now made it as global norms. I think that's the only slight positive note that we have really from the pandemic, and we're really working very closely with our stakeholders to really make sure that we leverage this opportunity that we have. What we've also seen is the digital surge that India is witnessing has also gotten more women online. Of course, that multiplies the struggle when we're talking about access to technology, about who owns the mobile phone and at what time of the day do women have access to the mobile phone. What UN Women has essentially been doing with these data points is working very, very closely with stakeholders like SEWA, and of course with the government. We've very recently, with the help of the European Union, launched a challenge for micro-entrepreneurs that will have access to working capital to come out with technology solutions to combat COVID-related issues. We received over 1,200 responses with excellent innovative ideas. In fact, the responses were so good that we intended to only choose 3 finalists, but we ended up choosing 5 finalists because we couldn't actually zero down, and there were so many wonderful solutions that were then also recommended to other corporates and mentors who were on the group. what we've also done is invested in building a cadre of 100,000 women, which I proudly can say will be the first batch of trained health workers on COVID-19 preventive measures. Again, this is not just to ensure that we have a trained workforce, but also to ensure that women who are on the ground are working as ASHA workers are actually trained to protect themselves and to protect their families. But the biggest gap for us has remained is the access of capital, the access of markets. Again, I think there are a lot of actors who are working on supply side issues, but the one thing that we have found very sticky and hard to get back is really demand, because of the cash in rotation that has really gone out. What we've essentially done is an initiative actually with the World Bank and the State Bank of India, where we've restructured a livelihood scheme, an initiative that really will bring access to low-cost capital for women who want to now expand their businesses. Our work with SEWA lies really at the center of all of this, is ensuring that that we're not only working on the ground in tactical ways on informal sector workers, but also in ways that it reflects on the policy scene. So we're very, very glad and proud of this partnership that we have with SEWA. It's very close to my heart. Again, the scene in India is needless to say, very heartbreaking. I've had the opportunity to actually get back to the ground over the last 2.5 weeks. And some of the struggles that women are facing are heartbreaking. On an average, in the places that I visited, women are in a household that has almost 9 to 12 members in the household, with them alone catering. They're literally gone from spending about 5 to 6 hours in unpaid care work to almost 12 to 13 hours in unpaid care work, really drawing out time and energy in bringing them back and ensuring that they have access to livelihoods, which has also taken away any form of autonomy that they have. So I think today, SEWA and us and all of us stand at a point where we have the possibility of crafting probably what everybody's calling a new normal, but we also have the responsibility of protecting the past. It's the first time where I felt that we're in a real situation where gains can be reversed, and so easily. So I think that places a huge amount of responsibility on all of us with twin burdens. And I'm really glad that we're all together in this journey. UN Women is again committed to supporting SEWA, is committed to working with other stakeholders, with particularly our colleagues in the struggle, the World Bank here in India, and of course other UN agencies and our civil society, our friends from the civil society. So we remain committed, but of course it's a journey that seems impossible alone.
Thank you so much, Nishtha. And we also remain committed to the partnership with UN Women, and I think we can do many things together. I'd like now to move to the ground and hear the voices of some women, some micro-entrepreneurs, who not just about the COVID crisis, but how they started, what happened to them during COVID, and how they're looking to the future. So this is about a 12-minute video, and I'm sure it will be quite eye-opening for many of us. So could we start the video now? Can we start the video?
मेरा नाम सुमन है, मैं जहांगीरपुरी में रहती हूँ और मैं ई रिक्शा चलाती हूँ। मुझे 1.5 साल हो गया अपने सेवा से जुड़े हुए, उन्हीं की तरफ से मेरी ये गाड़ी निकली है और आज उन्हीं सेवा वालों की तरफ से मैं ये गाड़ी चला रही हूँ।
নমস্কার, আমার নাম রূপালী মণ্ডল। আমি আমার বাড়ি ফুলিয়াতে। আমি সেবার একজন সদস্য আগ্রবান্দিতি। আমি তাঁতের কাজ করি, তাঁত বুনি। 7 বছর ধরে তাঁত বুনছি, 5 বছর থেকে ব্যবসাটা করছি আমি।
मेरा नाम आयशा मार्फत है और मैं गुजरात राज्य मेहसाणा जिला कड़ी तालुका से आई हूँ। मैं पेच एप्लिक, हैंडवर्क, सिलाई, क्रोशियो, ज्वेलरी मेकिंग मास्टर ट्रेनर है और मैं सेवा से अलग अलग जगह पे ट्रेनिंग देने जाती हूँ।
मेरा नाम आरिफा खान है और मैं जयपुर में शास्त्री नगर राजीव नगर में रहती हूँ। मैं अभी पढ़ाई कर रही हूँ, उसके साथ साथ मैं लैब का काम भी कर लेती हूँ और सिलाई भी करती हूँ। और मुझे सेवा राजस्थान से जुड़े हुए 4 साल हो चुके हैं। वैसे एक तो ना केमिकल वाला होता है, तो वो केमिकल वाला तो हम करते नहीं है, हम वो वाला करते हैं, वो ओरिजिनल लाख होती है ना, गरम लाख, वो तो हम उस पे काम करते हैं। तो उस पे मैं बेंगल्स वगैरह और ना अपनी साड़ी के पिन वगैरह होते हैं, वो ये सब बना लेती हूँ मैं खुद।
আমার এই জিনিসটা ভালো লাগছে, এই ছবিটা, সেই ছবিটা দিয়ে আমি একটু এঁকে নিলাম, এঁকে নিয়ে সেটার মধ্যে আমি সুতো ঘুরিয়ে ঘুরিয়ে করলাম, ডিজাইনটা বেশ সুন্দর হয়। ওটা জামদানি সিস্টেম আর কি, যেটা
12 साल की थी जब हमारे यहाँ पे कड़ी खुददार हस्तकला कोऑपरेटिव चलती थी। उसमें जो प्रेसिडेंट थे उनका नाम भी आयशा बेन था, तो उन्होंने हमारी मेंबरशिप ली और फिर हम लोगों को ट्रेनिंग देने बुलाते थे मेंबरशिप की, या फिर लीडरशिप हुए तो पार्टिसिपेट करते थे, कुशन देते थे, टेबल मैट देते थे, फिर दुपट्टा, ड्रेस, इस तरह करके हम लोग जो गलीचा होता है ना, वहां तक का मैंने काम किया है, सीखा है।
गाड़ी चलाने का तो मुझे शुरू से शौक था। मतलब जब मैं मम्मी के थी तब वहाँ गाड़ियां थी, तो स्कूटी बाइक वगैरह मेरे भाई हम लोगों ने मुझे चलाना सिखाया था, तो इतना मुझे डर नहीं लगा। जब यहाँ से ट्रेनिंग वगैरह दी तो मैं बेझिझक होकर मैंने कहा जब मैं वो गाड़ी चला सकती हूँ ये भी चला सकती हूँ। और मेरे को मतलब ये है कि मैं जरूरी नहीं है कि पूरा कंटिन्यू ड्यूटी की तरह मुझे सुबह जाना है शाम को ही आना है। इसमें मेरे बच्चों के साथ कोई परेशानी है, कोई दुख तकलीफ है तो मैं अपने घर पे बच्चों के साथ टाइम बिता सकती हूँ, या कोई परेशानी तो वापसी में अपने घर आ सकती हूँ।
मैं पढ़ी लिखी थी और मेरे अंदर स्किल भी थी और एक्टिव भी थी। तो फिर हमारे समाज में से जो प्रेसिडेंट थे उन्होंने बोला कि ये काम चालू करना है तो आप करोगे। मैंने बोला मैं तो घर से बाहर भी नहीं निकलती और बस स्टैंड भी मैंने नहीं देखा।
मैंने जब रिक्शा निकाला तो मेरे साथ कोई एग्री नहीं था, ना मेरे हस्बैंड ना मेरी सास, किसी ने मुझे सपोर्ट नहीं करा कि ई रिक्शा औरतों के चलाएगी, पता है बाहर कैसे कैसे लोग होते हैं, ये वो है, बहुत तरह की बातें। नहीं हमारे में यहाँ लड़कियों ने रिक्शा नहीं निकाला। फिर मैंने अपने मम्मी पापा से हेल्प मांगी तो मम्मी ने भी बोला कि बेटा देख लो, करना तो तुम्ही को है मगर देख लो इसकी जगह कुछ और कर लो।
জামদানির দাম আগে পাওয়া যেত, এখন অনলাইনে মানে প্রচুর, মানে সবাই শাড়ির ব্যবসা করছে, যার জন্য দামটা এতটাই কম হয়ে গেছে। 50 টাকা 40, মানে যে যেরকম পাচ্ছে 10-20 টাকার লাভে ছেড়ে দিচ্ছে, যার জন্য দামটা কম হচ্ছে। আর আগে প্রথম যখন সবাই বানাতো, অল্প লোক বানাতো, সেলটাও কম করতো, তখন হচ্ছে দামটা বেশি পাওয়া যেত, লাভটা বেশি হতো।
जो मार्केट में जिनकी दुकानें होती है ना, तो वो लोग खुद ही मतलब उनसे हमारा कांटेक्ट रहता है, या फिर उनके अलावा जो मतलब जो बिचौलिया रहते हैं, जैसे अब मुझे किसी से लेना है और वो ऐसे सबको माल देते हैं और फिर उसके बाद वो मार्केट में जा करके किसी को देते हैं ऐसे तीसरे नंबर पे। तो ऐसे करके हम किसी से लेते हैं। हमारा डायरेक्टली मार्केट ये नहीं है कि हम बना करके हम खुद बेचें। से डिजिटल बेटी का प्रोग्राम चला था, फिर हम उससे जुड़े। उससे जुड़ने के बाद हमें और काम सिखाए, बताए। पहले मैं सिर्फ छिपाई करती थी उस पे चूड़ियों पर उसके बाद हमें उसे मतलब अच्छे तरीके से पूरी उसकी जानकारी दी, उसके बारे में पूरा बताया, ये क्या है, कहाँ से आता है, कैसे बनता है, कौन सी चीज मिलाने से क्या बनता है, ऐसे करके फिर वहां से मुझे ज्यादा जानकारी मिली इसकी। अब ऐसा है कि मैं खुद अकेली पूरा कर सकती हूँ।
सेवा ने हमें समझाया इसके बारे में। फिर हमें कहीं से लोन नहीं मिलता, मगर इन्होंने अपनी ही सेवा में से हमें लोन दिलवा के हमारी गाड़ी फाइनल करवाई। फिर हमें से पूछा गया कि आप कैसे किस्त भरना पसंद करोगे, मतलब किस तरीके से आप अच्छे तरीके से दे सकते हो जो आपको कोई परेशानी नहीं हो और आपके भी खर्चा पानी चलता रहे और आप किस्त से भी नहीं पड़ते।
सेवा का मैं बहुत ही आभार के जो मैं 4 दीवारों में रहती थी और आज पूरी खुली दुनिया में मैं जा सकती हूँ कहीं भी।
সেবা আমাদের এখানে এসেছে 2016 সালে এসেছে, তখন থেকে আমি প্রথম থেকেই সেবার সঙ্গে যুক্ত। তো আমার সেবাতে আসতে তো ভালো লাগে বেশ, আর সেবাতে অনেক কিছু শেখায়, সেগুলো আমি অন্যদেরকে বলি, গিয়ে শেখাই। পজিটিভ যে জিনিসগুলো হয় সবকিছুই এখান থেকে পাওয়া যায়, যে মানুষের কি করে উপকারে লাগে, কি করে হচ্ছে মানুষের সেবা করা, মানে ভালো বেশি কাজ করানো যায়, তারপরে মানুষের পাশে দাঁড়াতে গেলে সবাই একসঙ্গে একত্রিত আমরা যদি হয়ে কাজটা করি সেটাও সফল হয়, সেই সব জিনিসগুলো শেখায়। আমার ভালো লাগে বেশ সেবাটা।
जो लॉकडाउन लगा था इससे मैंने 20-15 दिन पहले गाड़ियां निकाली थी। मुझे लगा काम सही चलता है तो मैंने गाड़ी निकाली रिक्शा, और 15-20 दिन बाद तो ये लॉकडाउन लग गया, तो बाहर निकलना भी अलाउ नहीं था, इसीलिए गाड़ी खड़ी करनी पड़ी। गाड़ी चलाई तो दुख हुआ कि अभी तो काम के लिए निकाला है और गाड़ी तो भी खड़ी हो गई। बीमारी को अभी आ रहा था, कुछ टाइम बाद आगे पीछे आती तो या तो पहले आ जाती, तो मुझे इतना था कि मैंने गाड़ी नहीं निकालती। अब गाड़ी निकाली है तब ये बीमारी आ गई जो मेरे पर सर पे कर्ज वगैरह चढ़ जाएगा, मैं कैसे क्या करूंगी, इसीलिए फिर थोड़ी परेशानी भी हो गई थी।
तो अगर सिलाई का काम रहता है तो मैं सिलाई भी कर लेती हूँ। बच्चे कोचिंग पढ़ने आते हैं, ट्यूशन पढ़ने आते हैं तो उन्हें भी पढ़ाती हूँ लॉकडाउन से पहले। लेकिन अभी तो बच्चे भी आना कम हो गए और सिलाई की डिमांड भी है नहीं है, क्योंकि यही के पैसे होंगे तो भाई अपने शौक भी पूरे करेंगे और ये काम भी नहीं चल रहा है, तो वो लो हो गया थोड़ा सब जगह से।
500-600 लोगों को मैंने ट्रेनिंग दी थी, उसमें से 200 लोगों को तो मैं रोजगारी देती हूँ, ये अभी लॉकडाउन के सिवा। लॉकडाउन में जैसे खा पी तो लेते थे, मेरा टिफिन सेवा बहुत अच्छी चली लॉकडाउन में। 40-50 लोगों का मैं टिफिन बेचती थी लॉकडाउन में, तो मेरा खर्चा निकल रहा है।
কোভিডের আগে ব্যবসাটা মোটামুটি ঠিকঠাক ছিল, যখন অর্ডারটা দিয়ে দিত ঠিকঠাক অর্ডারগুলো নিয়ে নিত শাড়ি বানানোর পর। আর কোভিডটা যখন শুরু হলো তখন ট্রেন বাস তো সবই বন্ধ হয়ে গেল, তখন দূরে তো মাল কলকাতায় দিতে পারিনি, তখন লোকালেও মহাজনরাও মানে সেল করতে পারিনি, যার জন্য হচ্ছে শাড়িগুলো নেইনি, টানা দিয়ে সেগুলো বন্ধ রেখেছে। মানুষের মানে বড় বিজনেস তো না, ছোট বিজনেস, সেখানে যদি 8-10 লাখ টাকার মাল ঘরে পড়ে যায় তো সমস্যা।
लॉकडाउन में भी चोरी छिपे चलाती थी कि बच्चों का दूध पानी का तो चाहिए था डेली का, तो अपना चोरी छिपे सुबह जल्दी में 1 आधे घंटे चला लेती थी, जो धूप वगैरह खर्चा निकल आता था। फिर लॉकडाउन जैसे थोड़ा खुला तो वैसे मेरी गाड़ी थोड़ी चलने लगी।
कुछ दिन तक तो हम थे घर पे, मतलब ऐसे कि क्या करे, और फिर घर पे भी यही था, किसी के पास कोई काम नहीं था, भैया पापा सब घर पे ही। फिर उसके बाद सेवा ऑफिस से मास्क के ऑर्डर आए थे हमारे लिए। पूरे लॉकडाउन मैंने वो मास्क सिले हैं और मैंने वहाँ से लॉकडाउन तक 1 महीने में 4000 रुपए का काम किया था उस लॉकडाउन में, और वो पैसे मैंने मम्मी को दिए थे।
স্বপ্ন আছে আমার, যেমন বিজনেসটা আমি আস্তে আস্তে একটু বড় করব, একটু অনলাইনে হোয়াটসঅ্যাপ বিজনেস করব, অনলাইনে দেবো, যেটা মহাজনের কাছে দিলে আমি দামটা পাই না সেটা আমি মানে মার্কেটে অনলাইনে দিলে একটু হয়তো দামটা বেশি পাবো, সেটা ইচ্ছা আছে আমার।
सपना मेरा तो बस यही है कि जो मेरे पे 4 बेटियां हैं उन्हें उन लोगों के पैरों पे खड़ा कर दूं, चाहे मुझे जितनी मेहनत करनी पड़े। मैं अपने हस्बैंड के ऊपर नहीं रहना चाहती, क्योंकि मेरे हस्बैंड कुछ अलग सोच के हैं, वो नहीं चाहते लड़कियां बाहर निकले या कुछ जींस वगैरह पहने, वो कुछ पुराने हिसाब के। मैं ऐसा नहीं चाहती, मैं चाहती हूँ मुझे कितनी भी मेहनत करनी पड़े मगर मैं 4 बेटियों को उनके खुद के पैर पे खड़ा देखना चाहती। ई रिक्शे का भी काम बहुत हल्का है, तो मैं सोच रही हूँ अभी ई रिक्शे की मेरी किस्त फाइनल नहीं हो जाती तब तक मैं अपना ई रिक्शे की लाइन में हूँ, और जब मेरे ई रिक्शा फाइनल हो जाएगा तो उसके बाद में ओला वगैरह गाड़ी सीखूंगी, इससे बड़ी गाड़ी वो चलाऊंगी।
मेरा तो आगे का ये विचार है कि जैसे मुझे दो काम, वैसे तो मैं सब खुद के लिए ऐसे नहीं बोलूंगी कि मुझे आता है, लेकिन मैं सब कर लेती हूँ, पर सब काम में मैं लाख का काम और ये सिलाई का काम भी ज्यादा करती हूँ। तो यही कि ये दोनों काम मेरे आगे जाए। सिर्फ अभी जैसे मैं जयपुर में रह रही हूँ, जिस एरिया में रह रही हूँ, तो ये लोग नहीं, बाकी और भी लोग देखें मेरे काम को ये, और इससे के मुझे फिर मेरा काम आगे जाएगा और मेरी पहचान भी बढ़ेगी, तो उस पे मेरे मम्मी पापा मुझ पे प्राउड भी फील करे।
सपना तो मुझे जो मेरी कड़ी की जो मंडली चलती थी बस वो पग भर हो जाए, और मेरे जैसी कोई लड़की भी मुझे तैयार करनी है, एक नहीं है, अब 5 करूंगी तो उसमें से एक लड़की तैयार होगी, मुझे ऐसा कुछ करना है।
Thank you, SEWA Bharat. And after hearing the voices of the 4 micro-entrepreneurs, all from the informal economy, I'd like to introduce Sanchita Mitra, my colleague. Sanchita Ben is actually a chartered accountant. And after her degree, she worked for more than 11 years with PricewaterhouseCoopers, after which she decided that the corporate sector was not for her. And she started volunteer work, and within a few years, 3-4 years, she joined SEWA, first in Delhi and then all over the country. She's been with SEWA for 16 years and now is leading SEWA Bharat, she's the national coordinator of SEWA Bharat. Over to you, Sanchita.
Thank you, Ranaben, for the introduction. And thank you for reminding me of half the identity which I had forgotten. Have become an integral part of SEWA. Okay. So for us, a woman micro-entrepreneur is a very local woman. She's poor and she's so local that her world of work is limited to half a kilometer of radius. Within this, she's looking for work. She gets her input material, she gets her finance, often informal finance, and her small market is around this. She does not go beyond this. Even her mindset is limited to this. And she's prone to various shocks. Could be financial shocks, could be climate shocks, could be market changes shocks, and any other health shocks. So with each shock, she comes down the pyramid and she feels she's alone. But when this woman joins SEWA, there is a change. And the change is, first of all, she identifies herself as a worker. She identifies herself as a worker. She's also linked to government identities, where the government also identifies her as a worker. So there are various needs which SEWA provides her. And she becomes part of a big SEWA movement. She becomes part of about 1.8 million women who are like her, and she starts relating and she feels that she's part of a big family. She anyway feels very empowered by this. What we see for an entrepreneur is need for skilling or training. Many of the entrepreneurs have traditional skills, like Rupali Ben. She is traditionally skilled to weave saris. But when she joins SEWA, she understands that she has to keep up with the market. The market needs intricate designs. Also, she's not trained in intricate designs because she's a woman. The intricate designs or the value work is done by men. So she tries to get those upgraded skill through SEWA. And then she aspires to move up the pyramid. When we talk of Ayesha Ben joined SEWA for several years, which she says. She's a leader. And with SEWA's work, what happens is you not only give her training, she has given livelihood to 500 women. And she's such an integral part of this movement that now she aspires that there should be a next cadre of master trainers. There should be people who will be again giving trainings to various other women. So there's a ripple effect with SEWA's work. Take the case of Suman Ben. Suman Ben joined SEWA and she dared to dream. She dared to have a non-traditional skill. And that is where she got some help from SEWA in the training, but she needed loan because without a loan, she could not afford a e-rickshaw. People were so much against a woman e-rickshaw. So everybody discouraged her, but she wanted to do so. So she approached SEWA for a loan. So SEWA also has, because finance, which Nishtha also said, is a very important part, and yet women keep looking for this finance and cannot access it. So SEWA builds women's cooperatives, women's bank, and that is how the women entrepreneurs link to this women cooperative. And this is her own cooperative because she has put in her share, she takes a decision, and she can access loan to buy to have working capital, to buy tools, to have her assets, And most of the terms and condition is as per her needs, because she's in the management, she's a decision maker, and that is how she also works and rises up the pyramid. Often Sewa's work is so holistic that Seva also tries to link her up with government schemes, which provides her with finance. So there is a lot of handholding required. So like filling up the form, registering oneself. So these are the work which Seva provides her with. The third important point definitely is the market. Market has been a very, very difficult point, because what our women do and reaching to the market, and that changing market is very difficult. But Seva provides this market, often through forming their own cooperatives or producer company. So when it is a institution, the institution directly gets in contact with, say, suppose if it's an artisans cooperative, artisans company, they get in contact with the international buyers. So there is a one-to-one negotiation, cutting all those layers and on the supply chain. And that is where she can negotiate for prices, she can negotiate for fair wages, fair conditions. And here, sometimes Seva is also known to conduct various exhibitions. In exhibition, what happens, the producer is directly in contact with the customer. When she comes in direct contact with the customer, she understands the value of her work. When she understands that she used to get so little and there were so many layers who were taking away that money, and now the customer is ready to pay, she feels that no, my work has value. Now she develops that negotiation skill. When she's talking to the customer, she also understands what the customer needs, whether there's a change in the market. This all empowers her and gives her more opportunity to increase her income. Seva also conducts sometimes tripartite meeting, where the worker, the employer, and the government come together for a meeting. These are platforms where for the first time, the worker actually sees the ultimate employer, or the ultimate employer sees the person who's making those products. And the government is in between, who's trying to find some kind of fair wage for the women, which we have done for tie and dye workers, which we have done for weavers in Pulia, and also other conditions like workers' card or any kind of card. So this forum becomes very important. This is a place where the women can voice their demands. Now we have seen in this video how these women face this COVID crisis. And this is also very important, that when they come to a big organization where they're part of a movement, her adaptability also increases. Take the example of Aisha Ben. She quickly thought that tiffin service would be a great business during this COVID crisis. And because she was part of a network, her community knew her, she could quickly move to that business. Take the example Arifa Ben. She has been doing tuition, she has been doing lakh bangles, but during COVID, what she did is she got mask orders from Seva, and she started making masks overnight. And during this COVID crisis, I would also say that I think in most of the slums and most of the villages, every woman who had a sewing machine started making masks. And that was the time, I would say, informal sector women all over India were trying to somehow keep the economy at the grassroots level alive. And that was also the time they were taking care of the health of our people in the country. So I think we can talk more about how she faced the COVID crisis. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Sanchita Ben. I now would like to hand it over to Mata Chen. A quick introduction. She's an old friend of Seva. We call her Mati Ben. She's a lecturer in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School, but her real identity is as the founder of WIEGO, Women in Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing, which she led for 20 years. and has brought it into a formidable international organization, which combines, which is well known worldwide for its work to improve the status of the working poor, especially women, through stronger organizations, improved statistics and research, and a more favorable policy environment. She's also worked before she joined before she became an academic and a WIEGO person. She also worked for 2 decades in the grassroots in Bangladesh and in India. So she is all-rounded in understands the informal economy as well as the policy framework. And I'd like to hand it over to you to moderate now, Matmen.
Thank you so much, Raynana and SEWA Bharat for this honor, and also to UN Women for inviting me to moderate this panel on such an important and timely topic, and with such a wonderful set of speakers. Just quickly, the format will be that we'll have 1 round of presentations, about 6 minutes each of the speakers, and then we will have a round of discussion, if you will, with some of the questions that come up through the Q&A. And our first speaker will be Caren, followed by Dr. Singh, followed by Madan Padaki. But I'd like to just set the context with 3 sets of data points, if you will. And I have to thank G. Ravindran, who was the former Additional Director General of the Central Statistical Office of India, for the first 2 sets of data points on women, self-employed, and on women's enterprises. And the final set is just some quick data from a study on the impact of COVID in Ahmedabad, the birthplace of SEWA. So what we know from the official data, and we know that the data in India has its limitations, but what it says is that just over half of all women workers, 51.5%, are self-employed. And of that, 0.5% of women workers are employers. The rest are either own account, which is they work in a single person operation or they head a family unit, or they are contributing family workers. And India has a very large percentage of contributing family workers. It's 31% of all women workers, and 20% are own account, but we think those are undercounted. And what we know about the women's enterprises in India are that 96, this is the converse, the 96% of women's enterprises are single person or family units without hired workers. And 81% are home-based. And 75% are in 4 sectors of the economy: garments, plus textiles, plus tobacco products, plus retail trade. And of course, in the rural areas, there are enterprises in agriculture and craft. And what we also know is that compared to men's enterprises in India, women's enterprises are associated with less capital intensity, lower average earnings, and in part it's because the women entrepreneurs work a shorter workday on average than the male because of their competing responsibilities, especially since so many of them are home-based. And just quickly on COVID, we have lots of data from different sources, but these are data from Ahmedabad. And what it shows is that during the peak lockdown in April, only 7% of the sample women, they were SEWA members, were able to work. And as of late June, under half had resumed work. And even among those who resumed work, they were working shorter days by half than in number of hours and days per week. and their earnings had only come up to 30% of what they were pre-COVID. So that's just to set the context. And now I'll turn to Caren Groen. She is a longtime friend, and it's wonderful that she's with us because she's the Global Director of Gender at the World Bank. And she, prior to joining the World Bank, she taught at American University. She worked for different organizations, including USAID and UNU Wider. She's a feminist economist par excellence, and she has written extensively on gender equity, women's employment, and on big topics like trade and taxation, but from a feminist perspective. So Caren, over to you. Such a pleasure.
Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can.
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much. I first of all want to thank SEWA Bharat and UN Women and all of the partners who organized this webinar. I have to say I'm very moved every time I hear the stories of women. The stories of women bring all of the data and the statistics and the policies to light, because it shows how they manifest in the daily lives and struggles and resilience of women. Nishta has opened this with a lot of data that I'm going to reinforce, and Marty as well. So let me just launch into it. Marty mentioned that the data are sorely lacking. And unfortunately, data systems around the world, whether it's enterprise surveys or household surveys or labor force surveys, really sorely lack information on the populations that we care about. So we've all struggled during this pandemic, including at the bank, to fill these gender data gaps by doing rapid pulse household surveys and rapid pulse enterprise surveys, largely phone-based. And this is to try to fill some of the cracks of the populations that are invisible. And from the surveys that we've done, we do know, as everybody before me has said, that women-owned, women self-employed, but women-owned micro and small enterprises are more severely affected than men. We conducted a survey of the women business leaders and the male business leaders who are on Facebook, 30,000 of them who have business accounts in 50 countries. We did this at the end of May, and we know that female business owners are about 7 percentage points more likely to have closed their businesses than male-owned businesses. And there are two reasons for this. One is the greater concentration in the sectors that are most affected by the public health restrictions, so lockdowns in particular, but it's also because of the sectors where women work, which Marty just referenced, in terms of the global consumer goods, in terms of retail trade. So for instance, women who are market vendors cannot get to the markets. And this is something that we need to really think about. We've also done similar surveys at the IFC and in conjunction with the International Trade Center, and the data all point in the same way. So what are some of the channels, I think, and pathways of this impact? So besides the lockdowns and other things, I think that, we've also seen disruptions in critical areas. The first is a lack of access to finance and working capital, which has been referenced. Just to give you one sense from our survey, 34% of businesses in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa all had an outstanding loan at the time of the survey. And of those with outstanding loans, 43% reported that they needed loan payment deferrals. This is just a needed policy. So getting liquidity and cash, helping businesses to delay or defer payments was something that was reported as a huge business need. So what are some other issues that are important in terms of channels? Well, and I'm going to come back to this in a few minutes. The digital pathway is absolutely critical. It's critical in terms of liquidity support, but it's critical for so many other things. But we know that globally, women are about 20% less likely to have a mobile phone, to be able to access a mobile phone, and about 23% less likely than men to be able to access the internet. And this is really worrying if we really care about digitalization. Why is digitalization so important? Well, it's important not just for being able to access cash, it's now important for things like online learning. So if you know, this is another pathway of impact. With school closures, kids are home. And the fact that children are home make the burdens on women so much more important. Let me give a few examples. If there's only one device in a household, we know from the surveys that we've done that it's more likely in some context for the boy child to get access to that mobile device than the girl child. That means that there's going to be lost learning for girls and they may not be able to recoup. But it also means if there's only one device, there's a lot of other issues and who's able to access that for other needs like social protection and cash transfers. So I do want to say that a few other things before I go to the policy very quickly. I want to point out, I mentioned that women are very affected by disrupted supply chains. And I want to mention here some of the sectors. One sector that Marty, I don't remember if she mentioned it or not, that's particularly important is agriculture and the food supply chain, which has been very disrupted around the world. And women participate in these chains in multiple ways as workers, as owners of small plots and so forth, but also in terms of their ability to access those kinds of markets. For me, this is a special area of policy concern. How do we get these markets back on track? And how do we go down the chains to ensure that those at a very bottom are able to have a holistic solution? Another thing that we need to think about in terms of impact, well, Marty, should I go on in terms of talking about impact or should I, or policies, or should I stop here and wait for the second round? Can't hear you.
You're mute,
Say
Marty.
something, yes, please say something about policies and then we can come back, yes.
Okay, great. So the things that I wanted to finally mention, let me turn to a few things that I think are really important in the policy context. The first is we need a whole ecosystem approach. And at least on the government side, we need different ministries really working together. So we might not think about this in terms of our policy solutions, but I first have to say as part of the ecosystem, we need to have the ministries be thinking about how we're going to provide childcare solutions to parents to enable them to resume work. And we need the school system to kick in so that parents can, particularly mothers who have been working with their children on education in terms of online learning, can reduce the time that they spend doing the unpaid care work that was referenced. But I think there's some more important policy issues as well that we need to pay attention to. When we talk about micro enterprises and the self-employed, as I mentioned earlier, they fall somewhere between big government systems. So they fall in the cracks between the unemployment system and the social protection system, and they fall in the cracks of the financing system. So the financing system often doesn't reach the very small, and we're missing a whole segment of financing for micro-owned firms. And we need to think about then how we bridge between social protection, cash transfer programs, and enterprise support. So let me start quickly with social protection. We need to redesign social protection programs in ways that bring in the informal, that bring in domestic workers, street vendors, traders, others, and many countries are doing that, and that's critically important. But beyond that horizontal expansion, we need to also have subsidies be topped up. So for instance, through the transfer itself, there needs to be support for childcare subsidies. There needs to be support for other things that these self-employed women need. But then beyond that, there's also market and enterprise support that's really critical. And here, I have to say, we see accelerated movement towards digitization. And I have a mantra which I've been saying, which is digitize, direct, and design. What do I mean by digitize? It means getting that infrastructure in place, that broadband for all of those areas, rural areas, peri-urban areas that lack reliable access to broadband. But then we need to, as we think about digitizing of the big infrastructure, we need to do things like get the devices, the phones, the internets in low-cost ways to women themselves, so that they can access services, whether it's the cash transfer from social protection or whether it's the emergency cash that a financial institution would provide them. So I also think in the social protection system, women need to be the default of the transfer. But as we think about building these systems forward and making them permanent, we need to design them differently so that they actually have all of the features that enable women to meet their needs. And as we think about this ecosystem, we need to think through the financial system that can provide different types of credit packages or meso level financing to women-owned firms. I do think there's an opportunity ahead of us to move away from collateral-based lending. And this has been piloted in South Asia for many, many years now. But in addition to group-based lending, there's many things that we've learned in terms of using psychometric tools to identify who's a reliable borrower that could be introduced into the financial system. In addition, we're starting to see more things like online platforms, e-commerce platforms, and this was mentioned by one of the SEWA workers. We need to actually have women be able to access, women entrepreneurs, online platforms that are going to help them. But to do that, we need bundled services in terms of the financial support, the training, the confidence boosting, and the other things that are going to enable them to become successful with that. I think I'll stop there and then we could have more discussion later.
Thank you so much, Caren. That's a rich menu. And I think the notion of the ecosystem is so important because there's no single magic bullet. So the next speaker is Dr. R.K. Singh, and he is head of promotion and development at India's Small Industries Development Bank of India, known widely by its acronym SIDBI. He's a development banker with a long career of supporting micro, small, and medium enterprises. So over to you, Dr. Singh.
Yeah, thank you. I will concentrate what activities, am I audible, right?
Yes, you're clear.
Yeah. So what all activities were undertaken by us as a development financial institution during COVID times. So besides setting up a helpline for MSME in collaboration with Invest India and coming out with direct lending schemes for COVID responsiveness, wherein we charged just 5% rate of interest. That was with government support, we initiated that. But a lot of activities were undertaken from the digitization side of it. And how do we boost the non-financial side and strengthen the ecosystem? So a few examples I will like to share with you all. And so SIDBI has adopted Vision 2.0, which is inclusive, innovative, and impact-oriented engagements to be done. And under that, we have adopted Mission Swavalamban. Swavalamban is basically in promoting entrepreneurship. So our target is, can we have one entrepreneur in each home? And can we kindle that sort of momentum? As it was being placed, I have some figures with me. We bring out a lot of knowledge series and information series, as also policy related periodicals we bring out. And one of the periodicals which we bring is MSME Pulse. This is in collaboration with one of the biggest credit information companies, CIBIL. And as per the latest edition, a few things I will quickly share with you, which is October edition of MSME Pulse. It has picked up that the loans with the booster support from Government of India, one of the major scheme was Emergency Credit Line Guarantee Scheme, where 100% guarantee was provided to loans extended by banks and other eligible institutions. The banks, public sector banks, disbursed 2.6 times higher than what they had pre-COVID period. So this is one which shows that the machinery was geared up to support these. And another data which comes out is entities or micro enterprise from urban, semi-urban, and rural areas fetched more credit access as against those in metro areas. So a lot of migrations were there from metro to rural and semi-urban areas. And so banks were providing support and were gearing up to that. The micro loans regarded the largest increase in number of loans. It was almost 3 times than the other segment, which is small, medium enterprise. So that also indicates that the thrust has been working out, and it has been on the microcredit side. Now, let me share a few digital access steps which we took in this path. SIDBI has been managing a Stand-up Mitra and Udyami Mitra portal. These are portals which provide digital access to anyone, anytime, from anywhere. They can access any bank in the country. So we have mapped entire banking system on the, in fact, all the scheduled commercial banks are mapped on the portal. So one can apply for loan from there. There are a lot of non-financial supports which come out in form of information series, knowing about different schemes, bankability kit. One can access what banks basically looks at while giving loans. There are more than 300 project profiles which are available for free access to people. So people have been doing access, people have been undertaking through the portal. It is there for a few years. For street vendors, Government of India started a scheme, PM Swanidhi, which was exclusively for street vendors, and loan up to Indian currency 10,000 rupees is being extended under this. And you'll be happy to know that almost this was announced in June, and then the portal was enabled and operationalized in July. It is powered by SIDBI Udyami Mitra portal only. And almost 2.5 million cases have been applied, and out of that 1.3 million cases have been sanctioned within this short period. And 39% street vendors are women. So that is the encouraging part. Similarly, so this scheme is a very good one. It is trying to enable these street vendors to be digitally empowered. So one is, this is no collateral is being charged. It is 1-year loan. There is an incentive for timely payment. If they make timely payment, then the loan amount would go higher. There is an interest subsidy of 7%, which is available to applicants. As I mentioned, it is collateral free. Then if they do digital transactions through different modes, like Google Pay, Paytm and others, they can get 100 rupees per month. So if you if they really go for digitized payment system, the loan can be free. Because if we take, say, at 18%, some loan is there, and there is a 7% interest subvention, then 11% is the rate being charged for 10,000. And so for a year, if you'll calculate 1,200 subsidy, if it comes in form of incentive for digital payments, this loan is as good as free. And then more than that, what is being done is, these are, we are trying to link them through other steps of digitization with the companies who are providing, for example, Swiggy, Zomato, and these all. So that step is being made in that direction to map these street vendors and to onboard them. So that would be the next level which will be taken care of. There is an exclusive scheme in India which we manage. That portal is Stand-up India. Stand-up India extends loan, there are 1.25 lakh bank branches across the country, and each bank branch has got a target to do 2 loans each. So one for women and one for SCSC, which is underserved segment. So if you see 1.25 lakh new enterprises being supported through Stand-up India scheme, and this scheme extends right up to 2025. It has been extended. And out of total around 96,000 borrowers, 77,000 around are women. So there is adequate enabler scheme which is available for this segment also. SIDBI, what we did was we have set up Solomon Connect Kendras, which is Entrepreneurship Connect Kendra centers. So Entrepreneurship Connect centers, what they do is all these migrants who have gone back, or the ones who are skilled. So we have set up 100 centers in 5 states, and they go and right from finger holding to hand holding and connecting to them to the bank and setting up an enterprise, as also following up and walking with them post setting up enterprise, which is very crucial. We have put in an expert agency. They have set up 100 centers, and these are localized NGOs who are working and managing these centers. So that is also another enabler where we have almost done profiling of 19,000 plus aspirants, and we have started linking them now. So right from training linkages to building their capacity, to making them bankable, to connecting them and setting up enterprise, the entire logical end sort of thing is being taken care through these centers. So anybody desirous of doing this have just to make a missed call to the center, and center starts connecting them to handhold them further. The one initiative which we had taken earlier was exclusively women. We have set up 1,000 schools, which is knitting schools. In Hindi, we call it Solomon Silai schools, but it is basically knitting schools. The idea was, when we adopted that each house should have an entrepreneur, then we thought the first influencer is mother. Let's try to touch from there. So we had set up these 1,000 homepreneurs. They have set up their enterprise out there. We give them a crash course in knitting and other things, and they take the knitting machine with them. And the good part of resilience which they have shown is, during this COVID time, we could find that all 1,000 were working. Initial hitch was there, and we gave them support in terms of making masks. So initial booster support we gave to manufacture 50,000 masks. Later on, they have taken the mission on their own, and they are all doing good. And motivated by that, we have started setting up 700 more schools. Already we have trained within this 1 month, we have trained more than 300 women. These are from hardship states. These are from aspirational districts which have challenges in terms of credit connect. So this is one initiative where we will take them to the next level of market connect and other things. I think broadly, I thought 2 models I can discuss here, and later on, maybe if time permits, then we can detail on more areas where we did such interventions. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Singh, and the clear links between financial inclusion and digital inclusion came out very clearly. So now our final speaker is Madan Padaki. He's the co-founder of the Global Alliance for Mass Entrepreneurship. GAME is the acronym. He's a social entrepreneur and has co-founded many things, a skills assessment company, a digital village commerce network, and an NGO for youth transformation. So over to you, Madan.
Thanks a lot, Professor. Delighted to be here. Thanks to SEWA Bharat, UN Women, for inviting me to share our thoughts. And it's a tough act to follow after all the wonderful thoughts by Caren and Dr. Singh. I will keep it short and make a few points about picking on what Caren talked about, the need for ecosystems. GAME was born out of one such thought, that India has a lot of necessity of entrepreneurs, not necessarily the opportunity-driven ones, and that we feel is a missing middle, where entrepreneurs, both men and women, can seize opportunities with both their hands and grow their businesses to employ 5 to 20 people. And our hypothesis is that if these kind of enterprises start mushrooming all across the country, then that will solve the jobs crisis that we are staring at now and probably for the next 10, 15 years. And the only way So GAME's mission is to create 10 million new mass entrepreneurs by 2030 who can generate 50 million jobs, and 50% of them being women. That's what we set ourselves to be going after, and clearly realize that this kind of a mission is not possible by any single entity. It's only the ecosystem coming together and by bringing the system together that can make this happen. And that's how GAME is the Global Alliance for Mass Entrepreneurship. That how do you bring every actor together to join forces and pull in the same direction. We started a couple of years ago, but kind of COVID accelerated our own journey in trying to figure out what do we need to do. And what I want to share is reflections from a survey that we did with Lead IFMR. It's a longitudinal survey, a pan-India survey covering about 1,600 odd entrepreneurs, out of which about 443 are women and women-owned enterprises. And these are across sectors. And we've been talking to them every month since May. What we're realizing is that well, the statistics that I think Nista was talking about, that only 12% or 13% of the 58 million enterprises in the country are women-owned. To dig a little deeper, our survey from this conversation that we're having with entrepreneurs show that only 43% of the women-owned enterprises fall in the category that report less than 10K profit a month, whereas it's only 16% for the men side of things. So which means women are 3 times likely to be earning lesser than 10K a month compared to their male counterparts, all things being equal, right? And similarly, about 40% of women-owned enterprises are self-run with no workers, while the corresponding figures for men is 18%. So what we are realizing in the survey is that, in a way, the COVID impact has not been that large because they were impacted far higher before COVID itself, right? For them, it's of course it's a death knell for several of them, but just want to make the point that the dice has been loaded against women entrepreneurs for a long time, and COVID has just shown the spotlight much more brightly on the issues being faced by women. Which brings me to 3 points that has come out of the survey. One is that in our surveys, we're realizing that women's professional and personal lives are far more blended and intertwined than most of us realize, right? So take this for example. 34% of the women entrepreneurs that we spoke to said, we don't have any personal saving at all, compared to just 25% of the men who said that. However, 60% of the women opted loans for personal use than 46% of the men who availed loans for personal use. So while on one hand, they don't have personal savings, equally they're availing loans for personal use during COVID, which means that they are bearing the brunt of the impact on the home front. Right? I think, again, Nista alluded to these figures, but 43% of the people we surveyed reported an increase in time spent on household work and an increase in unpaid care work. So which means during COVID, not only were they struggling as entrepreneurs, their entrepreneurial energies were diverted to home front and unpaid care work, right? So that's a double whammy that they were facing. The other point that came out very strongly was that women tend to be not only underserved just by mainstream for-profit enterprises, but also by social schemes of the government. Well, Dr. Singh has pointed out phenomenal work done by institutions like SIDBI and Ministry of MSME and so on and so forth. Our survey also shows that there's a lot more to be done, right? Sample this, 62% of the women we surveyed said that they did not know about the process and the procedures to apply for various loans under various schemes, and the comparative number for men was only 27%. So there is massive information asymmetry and awareness asymmetry that exists. Interestingly, we realized that despite this information asymmetry, more women entrepreneurs had applied for the loan than men, but they were 1.5 times more likely to be rejected for these schemes than their male counterparts. So if we need to figure out, how do we level the playing field for both information access as well as ability to access these schemes in a much better way. The last interesting part, and I think therein lies the answer, is that our surveys has has shown the fantastic role that NBFCs and SHGs have played in the survey, that only 6% men responded to self-help groups as they go into the self-help groups for support, while 28% women reported that self-help groups were a huge source of support for them during this pandemic, right? However, again, all things being equal, a male entrepreneur was 1.5 times more likely to get a loan from a bank, a formal loan from a bank, than a woman, right? So it brings us to the point, apart from the various statistics, what our learning has been to amplify what Caren and Prof. you mentioned. Of course, we need to ease up financial access for women. I think it's also about we need to figure out ways in which we can reach and reduce the information asymmetry that exists. Institutionalized care support for women. How do we not get them to have this double whammy of home unpaid work and running an enterprise at the same time? Barely 9% of the women we spoke to said they had taken any form of retooling themselves. We need to increase skills, and this here is where digitization plays a huge role. How do you equip them with digital skills? And we need to move them from just being self-run, own account workers to actually starting to build enterprises. Our other learning, and which is where I think I applaud the work that SEWA has been doing, is that peer networks have been shown in our surveys to be the most effective way in which they can learn from each other and get inspired by each other. And surveys also have shown that they need more role models. So the videos that the SEWA Bharat just displayed now, we need to be able to shout about these success stories, about women who have braved all odds to come out successful, to be shouted from the rooftops, and more women need to hear and be inspired by them. So I'll end with these comments, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more nuances to this discussion as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, and very important data points, and also this point about the support from the women's organizations to help channel the government to relief is something we're finding as well. And I think, of course, SEWA is the example par excellence of not only providing directly, but helping to facilitate and channel the food aid and the cash aid. So now I have been asked by SEWA Bharat whether I would be happy to continue for another 10 minutes beyond the assigned time, so we could go till another 20 minutes, let's say. I hope the panelists can as well, and I hope most of the attendees can as well, so we can have a good round of discussion. We need more questions coming in. There's one question for Dr. Singh, and there's a number of questions for Sanchita Mitra. So we can start with those. And I also have a question for Caren and Dr. Singh. So Sanchita, do you want to answer the set of questions that came in that were prompted by the SEWA video? Just as a cluster, not each individually, but just, yeah.
So I think one came from Nishita. She's asking particularly about the entrepreneur Rupali, whether how does she get the exact price without the intermediaries? So what happened is during this pandemic, there was a lot of stock which could not be sold. And there was an urgency to get rid of this, to get a fair value. So we put in an extra effort to link these women directly to customers. And it was a very small market, I would say, where these women could contact the customers, and we had to facilitate. So the first understanding that we got was they have to display their products. That means they have to photograph those products. So we had to teach them online photography, the angle, the lights, how to display, and putting a value to their products. That was when Rupali also said that I understand how valuable is the product that I make. And then came how she can also do the bank transfer and but this all being done is limited. You cannot scale this up. So the next level is when she joins a cooperative or a producer company and then access more customers, volume of business through this. and this cooperative then determines the price, and she becomes a shareholder in these cooperatives, as a result of which she also has a say. So this is the way normally that they are promoted. She rises up.
Just answer one more, Sanchita, and then I'll go to Dr. Singh, the question to Dr. Singh. Yeah?
Somebody asked about any linkages to the private or commercial manufacturing units. So previously, yes, we used to work with Agarbatti, and there was a private organization who used to buy back those Agarbattis, incense sticks. But during the pandemic, we have aligned our work, especially our producer company called Ruab, with export houses where we get orders. And in domestic companies also, we are trying to get orders for masks or any other items to help our home-based workers.
Thank you. Dr. Singh, the question of you was whether SIDBI is collecting gender disaggregated data so that you can actually track how many women micro-entrepreneurs have benefited under the ECLGS scheme.
So ECLGS is a guarantee scheme which is managed by one of the entities where SIDBI also provides management support, which is NCGTC. That is a portal. I need to check up whether they do this part of data capturing. But what I can tell is the portals which we are managing in terms of Udyami Mitra portal, or we have also set up another initiative which is in SIDBI leadership, which is PSB loans in 59 minutes. This is one initiative where we have reached out, we have extended almost 3 lakh loans, under which we are tracking women, how much it has gone. We have been whatever developmental initiatives we do, we implemented one DFID project, which is Poor State Inclusive Growth Program. There we had entire tracking, and it was in fact one of the main topics was gender mainstreaming. We worked a lot on that. So as far as digital, I think portals are concerned, Stand Up Mitra, Stand Up India, we are tracking anyhow what is the gender benefit which is going on. I'm sure it would be there, but I need to check up with the ECLGS managing team. Maybe I can separately send you across and you can pass it on. Yeah.
My question, I guess of both Caren and Dr. Singh, is to what degree in the discussions that you're part of about recovery, is there really a focus on recovery from below, let's say, to the base of the economic pyramid? How much is it really there, especially in the business support environment? Because I know that both in the US and also in India, there have been some attempts by bigger businesses to claim the business stimulus plans rather than the very small. And certainly we know that women's enterprises tend to be the smallest. So I just wanted to know how much in the discourse you hear about that.
Would you like me to start? Sure.
Yes, please.
I think the answer to that, Marty, is that it's uneven. In some countries and in some places, we do hear about attention to the base of the pyramid. I hear it much more frequently, however, in the social protection space, which is simply giving women cash, which is obviously essential because women and families need cash, and a little bit less so in the financial sector, with the exception of those well-known organizations that work with micro-entrepreneurs. Although I have to say in some countries, there's a greater recognition that the financial system does need to do more with this segment. So I think during this pandemic, and I mean, I think that one of the things we have to think about is where are the opportunities in the build forward? I don't like saying build back because I don't want to go back, but in the opportunities for building forward, what can we actually do differently in terms of design? And where do we have good evidence on things that are promising to help women and men be part of that essential ecosystem with all the linkages that are needed? And which of the solutions that we are seeing the business sector do, what can we make permanent as opposed to temporary? I am seeing in some places through the value chain space that more companies are paying attention to supply chain finance. And of course, that's critical for the intermediary part of the chain, but it doesn't necessarily get to the very bottom. So how are we going to be able to make those linkages there? How, when we think about building, and this is a comment that I did want to make to some of my colleagues, how do we ensure as we go forward that we can also help women pivot? I am, of course, think it's really incredible and important to help women who have sewing machines be able to pivot to making masks and personal protective equipment. But when we also think about the industries and the sectors of the market that are critical for our next wave economy, how are we going to ensure that these women can pivot to those opportunities, whether they're in the tech sector, whether they're in high value agriculture and so forth? And that's where I think the kind of models and things that SEWA is doing with cooperatives, with different modes of finance, can really come into play, because we need women to be part, not just of the sewing and the garment economy, but we need them in the higher value added places. And we have to put our hats on about how we get that diversification and making women be part of it.
So I will give
Dr. Singh.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I will
just not too long. Just okay.
Yeah. So I will give one example of an initiative which, like, see, micro enterprise or micro and small, they have more adjusting capability, and the resilience part is very good. And so, like one example I can state here is, we had supported a pilot project when it started during COVID time, where we thought women entrepreneurs we can bring to the sanitation and hygiene entrepreneurs SHE initiative we started in one of the states in Karnataka. It was a real good example of public-private community partnership. And we thought, let's see whether it works during this time. And you'll be happy that more than almost 200 entrepreneurs out of this, around 130, 140 women are there. They not only did this training and setting up their enterprise in sanitation of sanitizing the vehicles, but they have now the program they are requesting to scale it up in 6 states. In fact, last week only I was discussing with them. As also, like, they want to diversify now to sanitize buildings and other things. And they are asking that, can you help us connect with the market? Now, this is the type of evolution, I would say, with the market needs they do. And that can adjust the entire, see, what is banker looking at? It is a bankability. And if an entrepreneur who is able to look beyond is able to adjust to the requirements of the market, I think they can keep on surviving and doing good. And that is how they are an entrepreneur. Similarly, like we have one initiative, which is, you must have heard, State Rural Livelihood Mission, where we, there is a program where women were integrated into savings and extending sort of funds to people requiring at rural levels. And now, so we had intervened in few states, particularly one state, Bihar is there, where elections are going on. And there, now these bank sakis have asked that they would like to become micro-entrepreneurs and would try to tap certain opportunities which have emerged. Similarly, like, as I mentioned to you about a digital initiative, PSB loans in 59 minutes, which we have started. There was a demand that it should come down to bottom of pyramid by extending Mudra loans. Mudra loans in India are loans up to 1 million being given to manufacturing and service enterprises at very low level. Now this was a portal which was extending bigger loans, providing in principle loans. Now we have come down to cover the, I think I can call it the base of pyramid. So once we are able to set right, and as we discuss, democratize the access, other things fall in place, I would say. So this is how it evolves. And as I mentioned to you, and as Madanji was also mentioning, the adjustability and resilience for this segment is good. I think we need to build their non-financial capacity and tell them, yes, we are there to with you. And that is very important. If we as an institution play our role, things this is a new normal, everybody agrees. So I think we will be able to tackle these good way. Yeah.
Madan Bhai, if I may.
Yes, Monty
I'd like to ask you about this pivoting question, because I think it is a very important one, and what your experience is. I mean, you're an entrepreneur, but when you look at the mass entrepreneurs, or whatever term you use for the very base of the pyramid, how much scope do you see for pivoting, and what are the sectors that you see the pivoting towards?
Sure. Well, I addressed that question. I thought there were two other questions in that list of questions that came up, Martin, that were very interesting.
I didn't see that.
No,
I'm sorry.
nothing specific to me, but maybe I'll take that and then I'll end with this very quickly.
Okay.
One was that in our surveys as well, and we actually rolled out a national MSME report by bringing in a lot of experts, and we had 3 phases: survive, revive, and thrive. A lot of the questions that we've been talking about, or the answers, have been survival and revival. I think we should also use this window of opportunity to figure out how do we make women entrepreneurs thrive in an environment like this. And there was one question which was talking about, the gender bias and this whole attitudes are set early on, and how do you prepare young people for a world out there? One of the big initiatives at GAME, which we started off with the Delhi government, has been entrepreneurial mindsets curriculum that we teach in schools. And in Delhi, we have about 720,000 school kids who are learning how to be entrepreneurs by doing things. I think specifically, if all of us were to say, how do we teach this to every school kid, more importantly, every girl, and how do we create that aspect that there is an entrepreneurial mindset that they can develop, then we can set the stage for thriving rather than we are always being in the repair mode. How do we prepare them for the future? So I would think that as a group, if we can really start focusing on how do we make sure that there's a very strong entrepreneurial mindsets curriculum in every school in the country and in the world, could be an interesting one. The second question I think that came out was also about how do you gear the financial institutions to look at women entrepreneurs differently and understand where they're coming from. In fact, one, I wouldn't say radical, but one idea that I would like to, especially to all of us and Dr. Singh, from your vantage point is, how about running a certificate program for every banker out there on what does it take to lend to a woman? And what are the 5 things that you should know specifically? Well, it's all in the subconscious. How do we bubble that up? And can a women entrepreneur then say that I will not have any loan officer who's not certified to understand this perspective, right? So it'll make sure that the women entrepreneurs, when they go to a branch, and you can put out at the branch that all of our loan officers are certified women entrepreneur friendly, so to speak, right? It raises the game to a different level. And Martin, to your last point, see, the point is that pivoting happens when either you are driven by an opportunity and a hunger and entrepreneurial energy, or you're surrounded by that, right? And a lot of the cases, and my personal conversations, a lot of women have been that, oh, this is the only thing we can do, and this is fate, and this is what we are ordained to. How do you move them out of that mindset, right? Because the moment you move out of the mindset of a fixed mindset into a growth mindset, the pivoting, opportunity grabbing, everything happens. I've seen phenomenal stories where zero-educated, illiterate village girls are now running tuitions in their own villages because they've learned English. And they realize that this is a skill that I have, and I can teach this to other kids. from the Heredai Foundation, we came across a story where this girl who was literally sitting at home, not being to school, in 8 months flat is now giving tuitions on English, and she's earning about 10,000 rupees a month. And her dream is to set up a chain of these English training centers across her district. So what can we do as an ecosystem to bring this growth mindset and to continuously keep hammering home the message that you have to believe in yourself and it is possible? You know, one of my favorite all-time movies is Kung Fu Panda. How do we make sure that every panda out there becomes a dragon warrior? Right. So, and I think that's the challenge that we have in terms of changing the narrative.
Very good. I'm apologize if I haven't seen other questions that have come in, but I have a general one that maybe we could all reflect on, which is the importance of collectives of these women micro-entrepreneurs, and the various aspects of that we know about, which, you know, they're pooling their capital, they have joint access to the markets, and they have joint advocacy, because we know that it's not just the financial and digital inclusion, but the policy environment needs to change. We've talked about street vendors and loans, but we haven't talked about street vendors and cities that do not allow them to vend in good locations, central spaces, don't allow their natural markets to thrive. So I just want, and then there's, you know, the seat at the policy table for these collectives and the leaders of them. So something about the collectives of women entrepreneurs. So if we could have a go around, maybe we start with Caren.
Yes, thank you so much, Marty, because I'm sorry this will have to be my last intervention. My day is just starting here and I now have to go on to other meetings. But I do want to say that I think the power is in collectives and collective voices. And I think even in, you know, the SEWA self-help model is being, as you know, has probably been exported around the world. I have colleagues of mine who are in Nigeria and Ghana and Uganda and many other countries who are trying to replicate what SEWA has done. And of course, there's not perfect replicability, but we do know that the collective model is really critical. And that's true in certain sectors that we see. I want to go back and reference agriculture because it's a sector where both producer and distribution cooperatives have been really instrumental in keeping food security on the agenda and ensuring that households have access to the food that they need. But other kinds of collectives are equally important, whether it's the savings collectives or it's the childcare collectives that I referenced. And I do think that their voices are particularly important in terms of urban planning. I think particularly at the local level, the community representation through collectives or women's organizations is really key. And I want to say, back to Madan, I think that the idea of the public-private community-based approach is what is really necessary. And let me give you one concrete example. So for instance, in social protection, one of the biggest challenges that the system faces is expanding the social registry. And how do they reach those who are excluded, the informally employed? Well, they can partner with organizations like SEWA or Jivaka or BRAC or others to actually get those households who are part of those networks, those cooperatives, into the social registry so that those households and individuals can actually receive the cash transfer. And they can do it by bundling the phones with them, and they can do it by bundling the literacy training with that and the information that Dr. Singh has mentioned. So all of that I think is really important. And that goes back to the ecosystem. Public, private, community or cooperative community is what I think is what we want to see more present in the Building Forward Stronger. So that's where I would go. Thank you all. It's been a pleasure joining you.
Thank you, Caren. I call that the public-private people, you know, the 4 Ps of partnership rather than the 3 Ps. Very important. Thank you so much, Caren. Who would like to respond next? Suchitra, you of course are the expert on the collective enterprises of women. But what do you see as these sort of essentials of being collective for the women enterprises to thrive?
So when in our experience, what happens is when it's a very small enterprise, they find it very difficult to do the documentation, the financial returns, registration. So I think we should have better conducive ways of getting them on board. And in some of the states, we also find that the laws or the practices for cooperatives are very harsh. And they're harsher when it comes to women cooperatives. So it takes a long time to register. They do not believe that a women's cooperative can thrive. And after registration also, there are too many questions to be answered because it's a women's cooperative. It becomes very, very difficult. And in this difficulty, our women suffer a lot. Even small things, decisions rest with the registrar office. So there is a lot of delay. When we come to our women and as part of a movement, when we talked about vendors, of course, if they don't get a safe and conducive working space, their own income suffers. So it's very important that women collectivize and demand for the spaces. And in the town planning also, it so happens that many of our home-based workers are actually relocated to distant places and they lose out on work. So it's very important to collectivize and voice these concerns. One way, when Madan was talking about the application and the rejections, and I find the biggest challenge is women's application to formal finances also is very low. And because they are not very sure of the application processes, it's quite cumbersome and very difficult. I've also seen cases where Mudra loan was rejected because you're a single woman. The policy may not be saying this, but in practice, this happens. So when you were talking about the bank officials getting a kind of a certificate, I would also suggest here that if we can collectivize and promote and identify local women as financial intermediaries, they have more empathy and understanding and they're local, then they understand, they may be able to get more applications. They may be able to screen out rejection causes. So collectivizing these girls would also give them job opportunities. And if we incentivize these women for connecting to a micro-entrepreneur, then I think the micro-entrepreneurs can get access to finance, which is one of the most important parts.
Okay, can I have 1 minute each by Dr. Singh and Madan Bhai?
Yeah. So just wanted to add to suggestion of Madanji about having banker certification. There is already a program which is there, Indian Institute of Banking and Finance. There is a certification course on MSME financing. And SIDBI is pioneering one program under guidance of RBI, Reserve Bank, which is creating a pool of certified credit counselors. We call this approach CCC for CCC. Four is numeral. So certified credit counselor for credible credit connect, which is very important. Now, what we do is, so we are onboarding these credit counselor as a handholding agency. And yes, we are looking at this aspect also, that they develop this gender mainstreaming as a important aspect which is taken care. Now, during these COVID times, we all have seen in India, a lot of SHGs have come up wonderfully well on the marketing side when they got together and they have been coming out with good products and prowess. They have been able to show that side. SIDBI, we have undertaken a study recently, while we had done one or few pilots in earlier years. But we are again trying to re-explore whether community guarantee programs can be like, can work out in artisanal segments, segments which are very smaller ones. So that is one part. Maybe from policy study, we may move to action side of it. Like we recently did one study on social entrepreneurship, and we have moved it to now action part of it. So that is what is our endeavor. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Madan Bhai, you have
thank you.
The last word, I guess.
60 seconds. So I think I love the idea of CCC, Dr. Singh. I think that will bring a lot of sea of change in the whole world. Just one point I want to make on collectives. I think there's a lot of collective wisdom here. I want to figure out, how do we move just from physical collectives to digital collectives? Why can't a woman in a village be supported by another urban successful entrepreneur in a metro town? How can mentoring, how can, filling up forms, how can success stories, how do we really leverage digital to create virtual collectives? And therefore we can really be one for all and all for one, and that women entrepreneur really becomes a movement rather than just being limited to pockets of islands of excellence. And I think we have an opportunity now with a variety of government initiatives, private sector initiatives, to bring this alive and truly make women entrepreneurship a movement rather than keeping it to on the fringes. And I think that's an idea worth maybe having a separate conversation on.
Thank you very much. I think we've had a very rich discussion on this idea of a very supportive, multifaceted ecosystem. We've got financial and digital inclusion. We've got all the market business linkages. We have the social protection. We've spoken a little less on the legal and sort of policy recognition and support of these women micro-entrepreneurs. And we've talked about the importance of the collectives. And if I would say one additional fact from my 50 years of working on this, is that the gaps and deficiencies and the biases and the constraints and barriers tend to be very sector specific. So that what a street vendor faces is different than what a home-based worker faces. So we need to also have a really important sector lens to look at the supply chains or the sectors in which the workers operate to address the barriers and constraints. So I thank the panelists extremely for this rich discussion and for the attendees that have stayed on. And I'd like to turn it to Radhika Saxena from SEWA Bharat to conclude. Thank you all very much.
Thank you for moderating a lovely discussion, Professor.
Thank you, Madivan, for just throwing it back to me. And I'd just like to take this moment to thank all of our speakers today, our panelists, and also you, Madivan. Thank you. We've learned so much, and also everyone who's attending this session with us on Zoom and on Facebook Live as well. You've made this conversation so engaging. Thank you so much for all the questions that you've sent our way today. We've tried our best to address as many as we could. And if you would still like to continue this conversation, please feel free to reach out to us over email or our social media channels, and we'll try our best to answer as many and take this conversation forward. And I also just want to thank the team at SEWA Bharat who helped organize this webinar, including my colleagues Pallavi and Chitranka and everybody else. And to our president, Renana Chapala, for coming in and introducing everybody and moderating the first half of the webinar. And Nishtha Satyam as well, our partner from UN Women. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. Again, I'm very sorry that we've gone about 20 minutes over time, but thank you for continuing to stay with us, and thank you for making this conversation so rich. We'll close the webinar now, but please do keep writing to us through our social media channels, and we'll definitely get back to you. Thank you, everyone. Good night and good morning.